Hi, my name is Frank Price. I'm a senior HR strategist with Synergy HR Consulting. I've been with them for the last 3 years. I've spent about 40 years in human resources, and I'm now in a position where I like to help companies build strategies and growth strategies for their business and hopefully get them to a point where they're satisfied with their human resources function. I'd like to talk about when's the appropriate time to start an HR presence in your business. I'd like to give you a few pointers as to when you should look for that person to be in your business and when you can use a consulting firm like Synergy to help you. Very often we'll go into a company and we'll see that the owner is struggling with the ability to do simple things like have an effective offer letter that covers off the legalities of hiring someone and making sure they're compensated effectively. The owner is struggling to find the proper tools to use to help them set up a business. And it's simple things like trying to hire someone effectively. Very often there's questions that they don't know they can ask, the do's and don'ts of interviewing. So very often a small business owner will have a few things they've got to get done and they'll make some mistakes. And hopefully they haven't learned the hard way where they've asked the wrong kind of questions during interviews, or sometimes they've produced an offer letter for an employee that doesn't hit all the marks, and then down the road they're paying the consequences of that improper hire. A lot of times it has to do with culture building. When we go into a company, we try to find out from the owner what is the kind of business you're trying to run and who are the people that you're trying to work for you. And if you don't ask those questions, you don't get a better sense of how that person is trying to structure their business for growth. Because no one's just starting a business typically to keep a few people happy. There's a growth behind it, a profitability behind it. And I think very often what we're trying to do is figure out and listen what that owner wants and then structure what they need accordingly. Last week, I had a new client who isn't in the city but needed help with just the basics. And so I provided them with the do's and don'ts of interviews, how to set up a proper employment template. And, a lot of technology these days is able to actually do that. You can subscribe to services that allow you to download those kind of things. But more than that, what they're looking for is here's what you do. They want a calm, rational voice to be able to say the proper steps to get to where you want to go are the following. And then you list them off. And I think what I'd like to do when I come into a company is establish it from a base of where my experiences come in. I like to listen a lot. And often I will talk to that CEO or the owner of the business and try to say, but where are you going? What is it that you want to accomplish? Who are the people that are best suited to work in your business? And that's the only way you're going to be able to structure how that person can grow themselves. And really what we're talking about is what I call culture building. How do you establish the roots of the business and then attract the right people to be the ones to come and help you run it? Yeah, I think what's happened is they've had a bad experience somewhere along the line, and they may have had a person involved or not involved in helping them do that transactional work. But there's a lot of legalities that are involved in that work. And so you just have to know the ins and outs of doing it correctly to keep you out of trouble. Very often we're brought into businesses that are experiencing some headaches due to improper techniques or improper languages used in their documentation. And what we're trying to get at is to say, let's just do a reset. We'll do a quick audit to make sure here's what you're using. And it's so easy to replace the documentation as an example. Where it gets a little more difficult is when they're trying to bring in the right caliber people and they just haven't seemed to hit the mark. And so often I think what they're trying to do is they haven't been able to maybe give themselves a proper marketing standpoint from what are they looking for in a person? What is that ideal fit? And it's a culture, as I talked about before, it's a cultural fit that speaks to here is the kind of individual. So before that happens, the owner will always have experienced some kind of headache. And we're there to kind of take that headache away from them, smooth it out, fix it. I was just in a situation where we had to go in and, the HR wasn't effective. And in fact, it caused them a lot of legal challenges. And primarily because of the way the offer letters and the employment agreements had come out. But beyond that, we've stayed with that group for about a year. And altogether, what they've done is completely replaced all those basic functional pieces that need to be what I call the building blocks of any business. So again, it's offer letters, it's onboarding materials, it's training and development. How do you do that so that it meets that need of the individual business owner? And I think that's where we come in as a specialist group. It's a lot of experience that we've got going for us, and it's being able to listen to that individual, size up what they need, give them some solutions from a low hanging perspective, and then move on to the more strategic pieces. I don't think we get attention until we can fix their problem with a proper solution. And once we fix that problem, they're saying, "Oh, okay, I think I trust you now." And I can't emphasize that word enough, trust, because without it, we can't get anywhere in that business. So they need us. They need an established, trusted, credible partner who can come in and say, here's what I'm seeing. Does this meet up with what you're seeing? Then let's put the solution together from there. And I think it all comes back to listening. First things a business are going to require are what we call the basic building blocks of HR. You're going to need employment templates, onboarding information and documentation. You're going to need benefits enrollment kits. You're going to need policies and procedures. Without those, you can't establish any kind of protocol for the business, and employees need that to start off in the business on the right foot. And so very often, the very first day that an employee starts, they need to have all that piece taken care of. It's a typical sit down with their manager, filling in forms, going through the orientation that's required. Those are all the steps that are required that will take the business from bringing that person on board to having them sit down at their desk and start to become a functioning employee. Even before that, there needs to be things like interview questions. What are the do's and don'ts? Are we asking what is allowed to be asked in that process? So I would say those are what I would call the very, very basic building blocks. We take a look at the language of the employment contract or employment agreement to make sure it meets all the legalities for the jurisdiction that the person's going to be working in. Sometimes you have workers in one province and the company's headquartered in another. We have to make sure we've covered that off so that we're not confusing one province with the other. So we will look at all that, and often we'll do it through an auditing process. We'll have some quick questions and answers. We'll take a look at the forms that are being used. We'll review the employee data and then see, do they need or do they have some basic payroll information that is already set up? Again, we'll start with those basic areas. What we're trying to do is make sure, are they covering off everything from what I would call a risk mitigation prospect? Are they looking at the legalities? Have they taken the time to ensure the documents they're giving are legal in the jurisdiction they're working? And are they performing all the right procedures and policies so that employee knows from day one, I'm signing off on this policy. This is what it means. Here I go. I think it's a mixed bag. Unfortunately, you have companies that have gone the process of saying, well, we've hired a legal expert to come in and provide us with all that stuff, so we're good. And very often it doesn't always hit the mark, only because it could be multi-jurisdictional and they're not hitting what they need, let's say for a remote worker outside of that jurisdiction. Other times, they've just taken what they think is the best approach. And they're thinking, well, this is all basic stuff. I can use an application form that'll cover everything I need. And they just haven't thought through what is the next step beyond that. What am I going to do with that employee on their first day? Do I have them sitting down and filling in the correct paperwork? What about the company? What do they need to know about the business that I haven't told them or explained to them? How are they going to learn what the do's and don'ts of operating in this business are about? And so it's often a fly by night approach. It's often a hit and miss approach. And the business owner gets frustrated very quickly because they say, well, I don't have time for this. I better get someone who can help me with that. And they'll pawn it off to some other person or a manager who they think might be able to do it. And then that person's likely going to go through the exact same experience. Here's what I think is right. And they haven't realized that there's a body of expert knowledge that they can go to or that they can start doing some research on to help them. So very often business owners or CEOs of companies just sort of start off and don't know where to go. And so they rely on their own best instincts, as good as they are, but they're not always going to cover off everything they need to know. There are things that are known as wrongful hiring suits these days, where an employer has made an offer to an employee and has perhaps given them some verbal information. Oh, here's a great example. And here's the salary for the job, and we're going to give you a bonus at the end of the year. It's going to be based on a bunch of factors, and we'll get to it. And then a year comes and goes, and the employee hasn't seen their bonus, and they bring up the factor, and the owner says, well, we didn't really do well, so I can't give you a bonus. Well, wait a second. You told me when you hired me there was a commitment there. And so we'll get down into those kind of issues. Has the commitment been made? Was it an oral versus verbal? What's the legal aspects of that? How do the courts look at that? Because those are the things that an employer they're putting their best foot forward in terms of giving that employee, here's what I need you to know, and have said the wrong things or have made commitments in kind that can't be met down the road. So huge legal risk. And you can start to pay the penny for that. You will pay money in a lawsuit, whether it's a wrongful hire or a wrongful dismissal suit. I think a lot of that small business can be handled through a bunch of different opportunities, whether it's a subscription service or a just-in-time kind of HR approach. There are different ways to get to that level, but I think that the employer needs to understand that as I grow the business, I'm going to need to add expertise, because as the bigger the business grows, the complexities of laws, the legal aspects of hiring, the do's and don'ts that are involved. Yes, it is very heavily tied to that legal part, and you can make mistakes that will cost your business money. Originally, though, an owner starting off a business with, let's say, 5 or 10 employees just needs to be able to have a person or someone they can talk to who can give them that advice on how to set it up. As I've said before, often they go to a lawyer, an employment lawyer who tries to get that going for them, but that's an expensive route to go. And so you need to be able to scale up as you get beyond a certain number of employees as to when perhaps you might want to have that person. A great example is I've got a company in southern Alberta that only has 30 employees, and typical to that company, they've got a sort of an office manager that handles administrative work, IT work, looks after the HR documents in terms of hiring and onboarding. And I'm involved with them to make sure they do it the right way. I've provided them that sampling, but it's, again, only a 30-person company. They don't need a dedicated full-time HR person. And we're not recommending that, but they've got a person who can do the basic administrative level with the right guidance and advice and mentoring to help them on their way. And I think companies in that probably 0 to 30, sometimes 0 to 50 employee base are really that's the route that they should take, because they don't need to have that dedicated person. I've also dealt with companies that are 75 to 100 that have a dedicated HR person, and that person hasn't been properly educated in terms of those do's and don'ts. And so, you have to have built up that body of knowledge to be able to provide that advice. And so, an owner or a CEO of a business is looking for that expertise to say, here's the right way to do it. I think what I like to do when I work with companies is, my approach is give the best answer the first time, because they're not looking for option 2, 3, and 4. They want to know, how should I do this the right way, and solve that problem right away. And I think that's the approach you have to take. We talked about building trust. That's one way to do it, but it also gives them a stepping stone as they grow their business. When is the time to actually make the cut? I have two other companies where they have a full-time HR person, and all I do is I spend time mentoring that person, trying to grow them beyond the scope of knowledge that they have, because you can't replace 40 years of experience. You have to be able to provide that guidance and mentorship to them. And I think that's where, groups, small companies can get the best leg up, is just look for those places where you can get the guidance, where you can say, you're a small business owner, look at what it is in front of you that needs to get you to the next level. Often a mentorship approach, providing them guidance, being available to them, is the way to do that. For a small business of, say, 0 to 20 employees, the basic building blocks that they require are templates and tools, and sometimes a bit of technology can help with that. So there are subscription services, places that can give you the tools online that you can download for a fee to help you get that way. Most of those have been vetted in terms of the legalities for the jurisdiction, so the person or the owner can feel trusted that this stuff is going to be good for me. I'm not going to have a problem in terms of vetting it. And then what they'll often have is assign a person on their team to handle that aspect of it. And that person needs to be able to review that information, make sure they've hit the details, be able to go to some place for advice. The subscription models these days are such that you can download for a service fee whatever template you need, whether it's an onboarding orientation template or a simple hire letter for a part-time employee. So I think starting with that approach, that company from 0 to 20, that's all they really need to make sure that they stay on side. Be able to use that technology and those simple tools that are available out there, and go from there to build their company. And the other part about it is that they often come with a helpline or a call line where you're able to actually talk to a dedicated HR person who can give them advice on specific information that they may require. So I think that combination of being able to utilize a tool or technology along with some just-in-time verbal advice is the way to approach a small business going from, let's say, 0 to 20. So as you get beyond, let's say, 20 or 25 employee base, the needs of the business evolve, and so do the requirements from an HR perspective. And so, yes, you've got the tools and templates, but have you developed all the policies and procedures that you need? Very often, you'll need to have something like a respectful workplace policy, policies that cover things like anti-harassment or bullying or even violence in the workplace. Without those policies, you're leaving yourself open to potential litigation should something happen down the road. So as the business evolves and grows, the complexity rises, even from a legal perspective, because now as that business grows, they've had to put some effort into making sure everything is aligned. How do you align them? Well, you've got that culture. You've hopefully built something with some purpose, some vision, some values behind it. You need to make sure those policies are aligned to that original growth segment and strategy that the business put forward. But an owner also has to think about, okay, this is getting a little bit more convoluted for me. I'm spending a lot of time on hiring and on onboarding. I need to maybe look at putting a person in that position. And so, do they go and maybe get a part time person? Are they able to go and get an intern who can help them? Or is it an administrative person who's already in the business that they say, listen, I'm going to need you to take some courses in, let's say, HR basics, because there's a bunch of stuff that's going to happen. And I see us accelerating our growth. We're going to have to hire employees. What I'd like you to do is start by taking a kind of a recruitment 101. How do I interview people? Let's start with that. And then let's move into HR administration so that you're covering off the do's and don'ts of what it requires. I need that person in my business because I need that trust that I'm doing it the right way. And that's what it comes down to, that trust of I'm staying on side with the legal aspect of the work, but I have to grow the business and I can't spend all my time on it. I need to get somebody involved in helping me with that. And so that's where that person is going to get hopefully some training, perhaps is going to dedicate themselves to the HR side of the work. But often it's even at that size of a company, it's a person that has to wear many different hats. And so we'll try to come in and help mentor that person, keep them on track, be very specific to the questions that they ask in terms of here's where I can help you, here's where I can keep you on side. Or perhaps they even have to do a termination and they're not sure how's the right way to do this. Again, we're talking about the legal aspects of it, but that business owner is preoccupied with trying to keep the business running and growing it. It's that next step, and it's a very complicated step. In fact, it probably is very stressful for that owner because they're not sure they're doing it correctly. So they have to come and get that knowledge, that advice, that mentorship. They've got to be able to turn to a company that can handle that. But also, they've got to put their trust in the individual to make sure I've chosen the right person and I'm going to give them and I want them trained and I need someone to help them. And that's where the mentorship of that person will come into play. So we're going to try to get that person, bootstrapped up so that they're doing the right things at the right time. There's something called what we call the HR life cycle that every employee goes through in a company. And so it's from the recruiting and onboarding process when they're hired, and then they move into things like training and development. Maybe that you've got a person who you've brought on board with only 70% of the skill sets, you need to get them trained. So training and development becomes a portion of it. What about things like performance management? How do I measure their performance? As the business grows, I need to be able to make sure that that person's going to continue to contribute how I need them to in the future. But if I don't measure their performance, how will they know that they're off track or even on track? And often we tie performance to things like compensation and bonuses. And so it starts to build hiring the person, so recruiting and hiring, onboarding, orientation, training and development, performance management, compensation, benefits, bonuses. And then the final end of the cycle is if you have to offboard the person or let them go at some point. That's the employee life cycle in a company. Now, in between all that or added to that are things like promotions and moving up the scale. But the HR person has to know here's the encompassing portion of what that person's life cycle in the business is going to look like. Sometimes it's a bit of lather, rinse, repeat because they'll go through those same things multiple times in their career within the same company. But that's where the complexity of HR hits the road because now we're dealing with everything that employee does in the work. Outside of their physical day-to-day job, we're managing that human component because that person has to be motivated to come into work. And how do we help that business owner bridge that gap? And that's where I think that growth strategy, focusing on things beyond the basic policies and moving into performance management and compensation programs and structuring bonus plans, that's where the company is able to take off as they built their culture. When you get to about 50 plus employees, most people would recommend that you bring on board a dedicated HR resource, a person that can help with that aspect of it. The problem you're going to have in that 50 to 100 is you've only going to have the ability to afford a single person in that role. And that person has to cover off a lot of items like recruitment, like onboarding, like HR and benefits administration. And it's very often a junior person in that person that knows the basics of how to get it done, but doesn't have that skill or has built up enough experience to get it done right the first time all the time. And so there's a bit of risk there. You're going to have to take the plunge to get someone. What we often recommend is you bring that person on board and again get them help with a mentor or with a person that can assist in some of the more strategic parts of it. I have several companies where that's exactly what we do. They have an HR person, they're 50 to 100 employees, they've got a dedicated person. But when it comes to the more serious, specific, dedicated HR work, such as terminations or compensation or dealing with promotions, they try to talk to a more seasoned HR person who can bring that advice to them, because they're going to need that experience to make sure they do it the right way. So that person has to be there, but they're typically a junior person. They're an administrative role and they have a lot of ropes to learn. And so they need that expertise to be able to say, how am I going to do it right? Not just from here, but I need to talk to somebody who can give me that experience so I get it right the first time. The problem is it's so complex and you have to know where the business is at. It makes a lot of sense to talk about a fractional solution. The problem is it could be sometimes that a company of 30 employees needs that right away, as well as a company of 150. A great example is I went into a company recently with over 200 employees, and they had a dedicated team of 2 HR people on that team. But they were going to go through a process of very complex divestiture of some of their businesses, as well as a downsizing of their work. And they looked at the skill sets of their people within their HR team and brought me on board to help them over a course of 18 months divest their business and do it the proper way, because the skill sets of even a dedicated HR person of a 200 employee company is again limited to how to do it the right way. And so we were able to take over 220 employees and bring it down to a business that today is only 35 employees without any issues over that 18-month period as they sold off businesses. You have to deal with the complexity of that environment. So that's an example of where you already have 2 dedicated folks, and a senior HR person and a junior, and they still needed a fractional solution to come in and manage a specific project for them. It's always going to be different depending on the company. There was another company where they had 100 employees, they had no HR person whatsoever, and they brought us in to help them sell off a portion of their business, and we did it the right way so that as soon as we sold off that portion of the business, that new business entity turned around and brought me on board as their HR person on a fractional solution, because they saw how we were able to split the companies apart the right way, set it up through almost like a checklist approach. And that only comes from having that experience to do that multiple times, multiple ways. So it happens with small companies, the ups and downs, the change of the business, the growth, or sometimes the segmentation. And you have to be able to go in and judge, what does that company need at a given time? It's not always go in and mentor a junior person. Sometimes it's go in and take over a dedicated project. Sometimes it's go in and actually replace that HR person because they just don't have the skill sets that are going to be required moving forward. You have to be able to work with the owner of the business, do that audit, and assess where their existing HR team, if they have one, is at, or help them build it and mentor it up. So it's a multiple hat, multiple situation where you've got owners from, let's say, 0 to 250, and they all need a different kind of solution. So I think I've given some examples of where not one size fits all, but a multiple approach, a multiple solution strategy. Sometimes it's fractional, sometimes it's a software approach, sometimes it's a process where you have to go in and just mentor the existing team. Owners of businesses shouldn't be scared of HR. HR is there to help them keep them on side, help them mitigate risks, and stay on board in terms of the legal processes required. It should be something that an owner embraces and says, I have to do this for the business. It's the right approach. And in the long run, it's a cost saving solution as well.